In the year 79, the sky over a quiet Roman town turned black in the middle of the afternoon. Ash fell like snow, the air filled with the smell of sulfur, and in one villa overlooking the bay, a library of scrolls sat waiting to be read. Then came the heat, nearly 500 degrees in less than a second. The scrolls did not burn to ash. They cooked, carbonized, sealed shut forever, frozen mid-page, their words trapped inside a shell of black carbon that no human hand could open without destroying them. For 18 centuries, they sat in darkness, unread. Then, not long ago, without unrolling a single page, scientists read one anyway. This is the story of how a library was buried, lost, rediscovered, destroyed by the very people trying to save it, and finally, impossibly, read again. To understand what was lost, you have to stand in that villa before the mountain woke up. Picture a coastline south of Naples, where the Roman elite built their summer retreats along cliffs above a glittering sea. Herculaneum was smaller and wealthier than its more famous neighbor Pompeii. Fishermen mended nets on the shore, bathhouses echoed with laughter and the slap of wet feet on marble. And above the town, one villa stood apart from the rest. It belonged, historians believe, to the father-in-law of Julius Caesar. Grand courtyards, bronze statues, gardens shaded by colonnades. And at its heart, a room lined floor to ceiling with papyrus scrolls. A private library built to hold the ideas of the greatest minds of the ancient world. Nobody in that villa knew that the green, sleeping mountain behind them was not a mountain at all. It was a furnace, and its fuse had already been lit. On an August afternoon in the year 79, Mount Vesuvius tore itself open. A column of ash and pumice shot 20 miles into the sky, blotting out the sun over the Bay of Naples. In nearby Pompeii, the ash fell for hours, slowly burying the city under a soft, suffocating blanket. Many there had time to flee. Herculaneum was not so fortunate. The town sat closer to the volcano, and instead of ash, it was struck by something far more violent. A pyroclastic surge, a scalding wave of gas, rock, and ash moving faster than a car on a highway, hotter than an oven at full heat. It reached the town in minutes. Wood turned instantly to charcoal. Flesh vaporized where it stood. And in the villa's library, the scrolls, the accumulated writings of philosophers, poets, and thinkers, were struck by heat so extreme and so fast that they never had the chance to catch fire in the way you might imagine. There was no time for flame. There was only carbonization, a violent baking that turned soft papyrus into something closer to fragile black stone. The surge buried the entire town under more than 60 feet of volcanic material. Herculaneum did not simply disappear beneath the ash. It was sealed. For nearly 1,700 years, Herculaneum lay forgotten beneath the hardened volcanic rock. A town nobody remembered was even there. Then, in the early 1700s, workers digging a well-struck marble. Word spread. Excavators, and later treasure hunters working for a Bourbon king, began tunneling through the hardened rock, chasing statues and gold rather than knowledge. In the 1750s, they broke into a room unlike any other. Rows of small, blackened cylinders sat stacked on shelving, hundreds of them, shaped like scrolls but hardened into something resembling burnt firewood. At first, nobody understood what they were looking at. Some workers, not recognizing them as anything valuable, are said to have burned a few for fuel or tossed them aside as debris. It is one of history's quieter tragedies. Pieces of an ancient library, the only library to survive intact from the classical world, nearly discarded by the very people who found it. Eventually, someone realized the truth. These were books, nearly 2,000 scrolls, carbonized by the same heat that had destroyed the town around them. And now came an even harder question. How do you open a book made of ash without turning it to dust? The first attempts were brutal. Scrolls were sliced open with knives, and the fragile carbon layers crumbled apart in an instant, taking the words with them. Then, in the 1750s, a Vatican conservator named Antonio Piaggio built a strange and delicate machine, a device of silk threads, weights, and careful tension, designed to coax open a fraction of an inch of scroll at a time. It could take months to unroll a single one. It worked. Barely, slowly, at tremendous cost. Piece by piece, fragments of Greek philosophy emerged. Works by the Epicurean philosopher Philodemus, writings unseen by human eyes since the year the mountain erupted. But for every scroll painstakingly opened, dozens more sat too fragile to touch. Any attempt to unroll them destroyed them outright. Scholars began to accept a painful truth. Most of this library, humanity's only intact classical collection, might never be read. It would take the invention of tools. Its Roman owners could never have imagined to change that. Fast forward to the 21st century. For centuries, opening a Herculaneum scroll had meant physically touching it, and physically touching it had meant risking its destruction. Hundreds of scrolls remained rolled shut, considered too dangerous to attempt. A computer scientist named Brent Seals became obsessed with a different question. What if you never had to open the scroll at all? His idea was to scan the scrolls in 3 dimensions using X-ray imaging similar in concept to a hospital CT scan, capturing every twist and fold of the carbonized papyrus without a single physical touch. The scans would produce a detailed map of the scroll's internal structure, layer after layer, spiral after spiral. But a scan alone wasn't enough. The ink used by ancient scribes was made largely of carbon, and the scrolls themselves had been turned into carbon by the eruption. Trying to see carbon ink on carbonized paper was like trying to read black text on black paper in the dark. For years, this problem seemed unsolvable. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. If the ink couldn't be seen directly, perhaps its texture could be detected instead. The subtle way it sat raised or textured on the papyrus surface, a pattern invisible to the eye, but perhaps not invisible to a machine trained to look for it. That machine would be artificial intelligence. In March of 2023, Seals and his collaborators launched something unusual, a global competition open to anyone on Earth, offering cash prizes to whoever could train software to detect that hidden texture and turn it into readable letters. They called it the Vesuvius Challenge. Thousands of scans, terabytes of raw data pulled from a scroll sealed shut for 19 centuries, were released to the public. Coders, students, and researchers from dozens of countries began combing through the data, training neural networks to spot the faintest trace of ink on carbon. The first breakthrough came from a university student working largely on his own time. Buried inside the swirling scan data, a pattern emerged that resolved into letters, and then into a single, unmistakable word in ancient Greek: porphyros, purple. It was the first word read from the inside of an unopened Herculaneum scroll in 2,000 years, and it triggered something close to euphoria across the research community. If one word could be recovered, entire passages might follow. They did. By the end of that year, a small international team combining their techniques had extracted more than 2,000 Greek characters from a single scroll, entire columns of coherent text, believed to be a philosophical work discussing pleasure, music, and the taste of food, likely written by Philodemus himself. A library that had been sealed by fire was being read by light without a single fiber being touched. What makes this story remarkable isn't just the technology, it's the scale of what remains. Only a few hundred of the Herculaneum scrolls have ever been physically unrolled, and only a handful have now been digitally read. Somewhere beneath the modern town that sits atop the ruins today, archaeologists believe an even larger, undiscovered library may still lie buried, unexcavated, untouched since the eruption. Every scroll recovered is a message from a world that assumed it would be forgotten. A world of dinner parties and political debate, of philosophy scribbled by lamplight, of ordinary Roman scholars who could never have imagined their private study would one day be read by an algorithm on the other side of the planet, 2,000 years later. The people of that villa lost everything in a matter of minutes. Their home, their town, in many cases their lives. But their words, sealed in carbon, survived the very disaster that should have erased them. Stand today on the site where that library once stood, and you would see very little. A modern town built above buried ruins. Tourists walking streets that don't know what still lies beneath their feet. And yet, despite fire, burial, centuries of neglect, and the well-meaning damage of those who first tried to save it, this library endured. It waited for the right tools, it waited for the right minds, and 2,000 years later, it finally started to speak again. History has a way of doing that. It doesn't disappear, it waits. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, consider subscribing for more stories like this one. And tell us in the comments which lost city, forgotten library, or buried civilization should we uncover next.